The following presentation was recorded live for the International Association of Square Dance Callers 19th Annual Convention. We take you live to Virginia Beach, Virginia, where our session is just getting underway.
6. Hear ye, hear ye. The session will now commence. My name is Jerry Helt from Cincinnati, Ohio. My wife is Kathy from Cincinnati, Ohio, of course. I'm the moderator for this program. It's on history and heritage, where we came from and how we got there. Our panel people today, a gentleman on the left, Sir Stuart Basil Shacklette from Brandenburg, Kentucky by way of San Diego, alias Stu Shacklette. Nice hand. The gentleman on my right, Sir Alfred Griswold Brundage. Danbury, Connecticut by way of Florida, a living legend in his own time. A nice hand. We're going to be here for an hour and 15 minutes. Hi, how are you? She's waving. Good. Everyone who's interested in heritage and history, I hope is here. If not, the people are not here, you're going to miss something, because we have a good program today. We look at our American square dancing and say, where did it come from? How did we get here? What is this thing we're doing? I'd like to go down a list just quickly. Do-sa-do. That's a strange thing, isn't it? Where's that come from? Anybody knew? It's French. Dos-sa-dos, meaning back to back. Ladies' chain. Where does that come from? Ladies' change. Aha. Two ladies swap places. Allemande. French-German. German-French. Sachet. Chassé. Okay. Box the gnat. No, it doesn't come from Cincinnati. I'm sorry. Don't blame that one on me. Has anyone heard the call, box the gnat, box the flea, box the pretty girl back to me, box the apple, box the pear, box the girl from here to there? Did I get that right, Bob? Okay. So all those other things have died along. The fleas died. The apples and the pears went rotten on us, but box the gnat is still with us. And I think it's neat as a caller, as a teacher, it's nice to relate to the current movements to what we're doing right now in this session. The chase the rabbits, the whatever. It's interesting to tell somebody. And I've had people come up in a class and say, what is this box and that thing? What does that mean? Where does it come from? So you as a teacher should present that to those people and say, here's where it comes from. Once upon a time I made a sad mistake. Well, I made a lot of mistakes, but this was a sad mistake because we had a group of dancers who went through a class, finished the class, and somehow a square of them went off to a traditional dance. And right out of the top was something like Die for the Oyster and Chase for the Rabbit. They knew nothing, absolutely nothing. The whole thing was foreign to those good people. The next class night, they come back to Jerry and said, we paid a lot of hard-earned money to square dance, and we went out dancing the other night and didn't hit a lick. We knew none of those calls. So at that point, I felt people should know something about traditional dancing. They should be able to have some idea, some inkling of what's going on. So from that, and this is about 10 years ago, from that time on, always in a beginner's class, we do about 15, 20 minutes at the most, a Sicilian circle or Spanish circle around doing Chase the Rabbit, Dive for the Oyster, whatever. Just enough, if people go out somewhere, they're not embarrassed. So you might consider that if you're teaching contemporary classes. How many here teach contemporary classes? How many do some traditional dancing? Good. How many do contra dancing? Good. Same people. Just hold the hand up. Looking back a little bit to, and Al will talk about this, Henry Ford and Dr. Lloyd Shaw, a lot of those people put a lot of time and effort into square dancing, and you have to go back and give those people credit for what we have now. Somebody handed this activity to us. It has traditional roots, whatever. And it's interesting as a historian and as somebody who's interested in this to go back and say, where did all this come from? How did we get there? And it might be neat for just a little bit to do a dance from, let's say, the 1700s, and do a dance from maybe the 20s and 30s, and a little dance from our contemporary form. Could we have a rehearsed group down here. If that rehearsed group will please come forward and form on, as we say. Someone asked about the costume. While they're getting formed on here, we'll talk about this costume a little bit. Kathy is wearing a costume probably from, I'd say, 1982 or something like that. Goodwill vintage. I'm not sure what that dress is, really. I would say you could dance, probably in the 1900s, they were dancing in that sort of a costume. 1800s. The jacket that I'm wearing is 1916, probably older than, I don't think anyone in here is that old. The sash is a badge of, could mean several things at an early dance. I could be the floor manager. I could belong to a secret organization. Several things. And it was pretty much white tie, white shirt, and so forth. So I guess I could be a caller of the early 1700s or so. We're going to do a little dance from the early 1700s called the Hunt. In fact, it's called Hunt the Squirrel. Hunt the Squirrel. It's a revolutionary dance, and we'll do it for you. Think of long contra lines. We have little bitty lines here this morning, but think of long contra lines, and we'll do Hunt the Squirrel. You're on at the head. Hunt on the ladies' side. Hunt on the gents' side. Acties down the center. Come back. Cast off. Right to left through. Right to left back. Honor your partners all. Very nice. Good, good, good. A nice hand for our champion dancers out here. For the benefit of the tape, that is a Lloyd Shaw record, and it's an LSF 109A. And it's actually the tune is it's by, I guess, Dudley Lofman is the orchestra on this, and it's a medley of some Scottish tunes, and they do Doubtful Shepherd to that particular piece of music. Okay, from this particular hunt dance, along comes the 20s, the 30s, the late 1800s, and they're dancing a dance called Chase the Rabbit, Chase the Squirrel. Would we cross over here at the head of the set, and one couple face the other couple? So we'll put it into sort of 20s style or whatever at that particular time and dance a little bit of Chase the Rabbit, Chase the Squirrel. And music would be, let's see, what do we got here? A Le Mans Records, and it's LR10120. Old style music, Chase the Rabbit, Chase the Squirrel. Okay? The tune happens to be Arkansas Traveler, a very old traditional tune. Ready now. Chase the rabbit, chase the squirrel, chase that pretty girl around the world. Chase the possum, chase the coon, chase the big boy around the moon. Circle up 4 to the left you go. Circle to the right like you did a while ago. Swing your partner there. Bow to the partners all. Okay, how about a nice hand for our chasing group? Okay, to update it a little bit to our contemporary form, we're going to do a little bit of chase right. And the music on this is a Blue Star 2405 called Happy Patter for the benefit of the tape. Okay, ready to chase a little bit? Here we go. Head couples forward up to the middle and back. Pass through, chase right. Boy, run around a girl. Pass through to the left, chase. And the lady, run around the man. Bow to the opposite. Bow to your partners all. A nice hand for that glorious group of dancers out there. So it's interesting to see the evolution of an old 1700s dance and then a 20s or early 1800s going on to our contemporary dance form. I'm not sure who wrote Chase Right. Anybody? Nice. They're having fun next door. And speaking of old-time dances, and I want to turn this, I'm going to get off this mic because we have some good stuff coming from our panel. Henry Ford was probably the first to record square dancing, really, as far as records and so forth. And this little dance is one that a lot of callers have danced and have probably called. And it's on a Henry Ford label. And it's called Life on the Ocean Wave.
Life on the Ocean Wave. Cross over and by the gentleman's son. Oh, I say cross over and all join hands. On in your corner, lady, on in your partner's hall. Sing the corner, lady, and open up the hall.
And here was a big hit that Al Brundage used many moons ago, of which he's going to tell you about this. This was his big all-time hit.
Dinky, dinky, parley boo. And two ladies go forward and back, parley boo. Forward again and close the door, parley boo. Close the door in your corner, oh, Parliament right in the grand tenor. Dinky, dinky, parley boo. Grand right and left. Parley boo.
That is not Al calling on that, by the way. How about a hand for the Henry Ford music? A lot of people think that's Benjamin Lovett doing the calling on that. That is not Benjamin Lovett. Henry Ford hired an opera singer to do the recording for them. And that's typical opera on there. He just sings it away. Okay, to move on to our panel. Mr. Stu Shacklette, a gentleman who is well versed in the folk field, contra, square, quadrille, you name it, he's been there. Let's have a warm welcome for Stu Shacklette.
Thank you, Jerry. When Jerry had contacted me and the executive secretary contacted me and said, would you be on a panel? I said, who's going to be on the panel? He said, Jerry Helt. Well, I said, I'll do it. So I enjoy working with Jerry and being with him. And, of course, it's certainly a pleasure to be with Al. I was surprised when I found out he was going to be here. I thought it was Earl. somebody told me it was going to be Earl Johnson. I thought, well, okay. But it is certainly a pleasure. In looking at the topic of what we were going to talk about, I did some research. I like to research. I like to go back and find things. And in some of the things that I use, some of the things that I do, we can find traces of things that were done back in the early 1600s. One of the things I do, which I think they had a presentation on last year at CALLERLAB, was called the Kentucky Running Set. And many of the figures that we do in the Kentucky Running Set can be traced back to the Playford books in the early 1600s. Documentation was found on some of the figures that actually are still used in the Kentucky Running Set. So the tie is there with what we're doing today and what was back as far as the time when it started being recorded by John Playford in his books. Also, when Cecil Sharp researched in the United States, he found the running set in the Appalachian areas, and at that time they didn't have a name for it. The people would just say, hey, let's go run a set. And so Cecil Sharp gave the name the Kentucky Running Set. That's where he found it, and that's what they called it. Let's run a set, so that's where it got its name. But we found a lot of similarity in things that were done in those figures in things that were done back in the early 1600s. There's another curious thing that I found too. How many of you remember when the star-through came out? How many remember snapperoo? Okay. Star-through, snapperoo started basically the same thing, only different sections of the country brought this out. I think, who was it? Marvin Chilling and Buzz Brown started using the snapperoo. Everybody else was using star-through. But anyhow, we smoothed it out and it became a star-through. When was that? Does anybody remember when that was invented? Before your time. Yona says before her time. But, okay, the 60s. I have a dance that I use a lot. It's a quadrille called the Changere quadrille. And it was originally put out in the late 1800s. And they've got a figure in that dance where two people come face to face and the instructions say, turn the lady under. Gents using right hand, the lady using left hand. What is that? Star-through. They didn't call it a star-through. They said turn the lady under. So the similarity was back there even in the late 1800s doing star-throughs. It's not something that we invented in 1950. So the 60s. Okay? So even though we think we're inventing new things, there are things that have been used before in many of the dances. I got 5 pages here of a history of dance, and I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I would like to give you some of the interesting points in it. Man has always used dance to express emotions and beliefs about the world, society, and his life in general. It is presumed that primitive man's wisdom was limited to the knowledge gained through the use of the 5 senses. It is assumed that during prehistoric times, before vocal language was invented, sign language and gestures were the chief means of communication. Thousands of years must have passed before prehistoric man developed talents in speaking and writing. During this period, the art of imitation was developed to a much greater degree than one commonly finds exhibited in today's society. Moreover, it is presumed that primitive man used his entire body in gesturing. When gestures and body movements began to fall into a regular or irregular pattern caused by the occurrence of accented beats and movements, men had created dance. Many antiquarians and historians believe that the most enjoyable and important activity in the life of primitive man was the dance. We know that he has special dances for almost every important occasion, such as the birth, acceptance of the young people into adulthood, marriages, deaths. He had dances for courage before battles and dances to celebrate victories. It was through dance that the primitive man seemed to meet the challenge of his environment. The question is, what is dance? Dance is a series of movements. Among primitive man, it always had some accomplishment by means of which the rhythm was emphasized. This accomplishment, by means of which the rhythm, by which the hands and the clapping, the beating of the drum, the hitting of two rocks or sticks together. Ancient man danced primarily for ceremony purposes, even though he was expressing his emotion at the same time. The scriptures contain ample evidence that there was a considerable number of celebrated events at which the ancient Hebrews danced. David, the king of Jews, danced in the presence of all the people. The Israelites danced at the inauguration of the golden calf. Christ, in narrating the parable of the prodigal son, refers to music and dancing. The Hebrews gave dance a high important place in their ceremony of worship. Moses, after crossing the Red Sea, bade the children of Israel dance. Solomon said there is time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. Dancing is also frequently alluded to in the books of both Matthew and Luke. The Egyptians, engravings of the 6,000 years ago, reveal the use of dance in religious rituals. One of the most interesting and best known of ancient Egyptian dances was the astronomical dance performed by the priests. The Greeks, through their ingenuity and elegant taste, polished and refined the art of dancing so that it stimulated considerable emotional excitement in the minds of the spectators. The philosophers, writers of Greek, strongly recommended that all pupils be taught dance for its beneficial effects on the body and the mind. Greece was truly the center of the world's most cultured civilization. However, she fell prey to and became a part of the great Roman Empire in 146 BC. With the declination of the Roman Empire, dancing, like all the arts, almost passed out of existence. The Renaissance began to bring about a refreshing influence in all the areas of dance. Exclusive interest in religion began to diminish, and greater emphasis was placed on human beings. The humanist writers, because of the success of the knighthood, recommended all kinds of vigorous exercise. This attitude opened the door for a rebirth of the interest in all the phases of dance. Consequently, with the beginning of the Reformation, freedom to pursue leisure time activities for the sake of pure enjoyment was not only tolerated but actually encouraged. Of all the pastimes, the best beloved was dance. In England, on May Day, the villagers gathered around a gaily decorated maypole. Under Henry VIII, the May Games usually included the Morris dances, which had come from the Spanish Moors via Spain, the fandango and the castanets. Luther approved of dancing and relished especially in the square dance, with friendly bows, embracing, and the hearty swinging of the partner. Charles VI often led the ballet or dance of the French court. Since the Reformation, there had been a continuous trend toward a greater variety of dance, along with a greater number of participants each year. Almost every country in the world has made unique contributions to the field of dance. Most of the countries of Europe have contributed either complete dances, individual steps, or specific styling, all of which have greatly influenced dance in the United States. As the Renaissance spread westward from country to country, so did the interest in dance. From France, the ancient country dance, were brought to England, changed to country dances. The French versions appeared to have been the root of the modern-day quadrilles. The country dances were generally performed before couples and consisted of a variety of movements. Perhaps Germany's most important contribution to the field of dance was the German cotillion, later called the German. There were a great variety of figures for the cotillion. In fact, sources listed 250 different figures. In the 19th century, the waltz became one of the most popular and most accepted kinds of dance. Most authorities give credit to Germany for the origination of the waltz. Owing to the research of Cecil Sharp, much of England's folklore and many of the folk dances have been recovered. It was chiefly through his efforts at the beginning of the 20th century that considerable interest in the revival of folk dance was developed. Perhaps the oldest and simplest forms of English folk dances were those performed in a closed circle. From the closed circle, the chain dance evolved. After the chain dance came the processional marches, and the promenade. It is believed that they were originally used to ensure continued flavor and fertility with governing spirits. The entire community participated in the English processionals. Research has revealed that there were two main types of ritual dances in England, the sword dance and the Morris dance. Originally, they were both danced by men. When Henry VIII broke all ties with the Pope, declared himself head of the English Church, dancing became very popular throughout England. Henry was an enthusiastic supporter of dance. Down through the years, Scotland has maintained a unique clan system which was influenced by the dress, the education, folkways, and dance. In 1746, Prince Charles Stuart tried to put an end to the clan system. The paying of bagpipes, the wearing of the costumes. However, as usual, edicts such as this tend to pull the Scottish clans together and make them more determined than ever to wear their costumes into the dance. The Irish have two distinct styles of dance. In one, the dance can be described as recreational because there is much romping, laughter, and community spirit displayed. In the second, the dancers display fine technical skills and unique body movements. The South American Indian tribes, such as the Inca, the Peru, and the Amazons of Brazil, developed many dances, much of which were extremely primitive. During the 18th and 19th century, festivals and celebrations became important to the cultures. The 20th century brought forth a great surge of interest in the polyrhythms and the syncopations. If we are to understand the place of dance and folklore in America, its meaning and importance, we must understand the condition under which the people existed, and what they did as they tried to reestablish the dignity of man. We must understand that all the colonies of the New World gave their encompassed the traditions and customs of more and more nationalities, and they were also influenced by cultures of the American Indians. Dance in America gradually grew to reflect these cultures, and in these syntheses odd dance throughout the world. And John Playford's The English Dance Master all emphasized the value of dance. These books made their way to America and stimulated interest in the dance. People gradually began to realize that dance developed many desirable attributes, such as good manners, behavior, attractive carriage, and graceful movements. Prehistoric pageants were addressed in the period immediately following the American Revolution. The pageants often included some kind of dancing, and one of the most unusual dance exhibitions during this time was used in the ceremonies of the Shakers. The Shakers, who started or settled in the New England area, later migrated to the far south as Kentucky. Their dance followed basic square dance form, with the exception that the men and women performed in separate groups. The Shakers contributed nothing new to the field of dance, but they did keep alive the idea of dance as the basic part of a religion, and an idea that perhaps made our society a little more tolerant than it otherwise might have been. Although the immigrants of the New England came to the New World for religious freedom, those of the southern colonies came for economic reasons. These colonies therefore had less restrictions in establishing interest in dance. During the 18th century, dance became one of the most popular activities in the southern schools. Well-known educators did much for its promotion and acceptance of the activity in the physical education curriculum. And today, one of our, best sources of music comes from a church group that put out some records, and I imagine a lot of you have it in your boxes at home, the Methodist series of records, and they still have some of those today that they put out, but they encourage that. In looking at the chart that Dorothy Shaw had published, called the Genealogy Chart 1450 to the present, there are a couple of connections here that have not been revealed. We talk about the quadrilles, the great quadrilles, the singing quadrilles, and we find that they are showing that they're coming from England and also from France. We also found that the quadrilles came from Scotland and Ireland. The Scottish and the Irish would not let one or the other outdo them. The Scottish put together their dances, and they called them one thing. The Irish put the same dances together and call them something different. You'll find them listed under Hibernian quadrilles or Caledonian quadrilles, and the nationality has to reflect on where they came from. The Kentucky running set also can be traced back through the English ancestry, and that also is noted here on the chart. So we do have ties with just about any nationality that we can go back to. And I guess that's it, Jerry.
How about a nice hand for Stu? Good job. Somewhere along the way, CALLERLAB come up with a whole chart of configurations. And I wandered upon a chart of configurations, and I compared this with our CALLERLAB chart, and CALLERLAB's a little behind time, because this has more configurations on it. And this is the year 1819. So that's kind of strange. There's a copy of this that you'll receive today, and my apologies for it's a little bit wiped out because it's a little old, and the copy I got was probably 4 generations. And but it shows some very interesting figures on here. I think you'll enjoy that. Also have a trivia today for you. In the 50s, there was a certain magazine called, what's the name of that magazine again? Sets in Order magazine. I remember that magazine. And there was an ad for, I guess, about a 1950s dress. And anybody want to take a wild guess as to who that person is modeling that dress? Who? Elizabeth Taylor. No, not quite. You're close. No. Becky? No. Give you a hint. She's deceased. Dorothy Shaw? No. Yes, an actress. Marilyn Monroe. No. Judy Garland. No. Natalie Wood. I'm sure the Sets in Order paid a lot of money to get her to model for that. Oh, she paid you. Good. It's a very unique picture. We'll put it out here in a little bit, and you'll have a chance to see it. Our next gentleman, a man who has a background that I could go on for hours and hours and talk about his background. Living through probably from 1933. His father was involved in dancing, his mother, his brother, the whole family involved in dancing in this is the Danbury, Connecticut area. And a gentleman of which we all know, we love, here he is, Al Brundage.
Thank you, Jerry. Save it. Save it. I'd like to thank Jerry and Stu, and my pleasure and privilege to be on the panel with you both. My history is a little bit more personal. I have 18 pages, which you will receive a copy of. So I'm only going to go through them now, kind of briefly, to tell you kind of how it happened to me and what happened to New England and how New England had the transition between what we used to call just square dancing and what we now call square dancing. But we used to call it, but it was country style, New England style, Eastern style, and just plain old visiting couple dances for the most part. you heard a record put out by Henry Ford with an unknown caller, some opera singer. And strangely enough, they call the Two Head Gents crossover, Life on the Ocean Wave, and that is the very first call I ever called. And I didn't copy it from that record. We didn't have those things in those days. But I started in when I was a young lad, and it'll be in this manuscript, by listening to square dance music in a little old house that used to be a stagecoach stop just about a mile away from our farm in Danbury, Connecticut. And the first tunes that I can remember included Life on the Ocean Wave. And as boys in the neighborhood, there's not too much to do out in the farming areas, and we'd go down and we'd stand outside and listen and watch people dance and hear the music. We were not allowed to go in, and our parents were not happy once they found out we were even in the area, because they served liquor there, and that was a bad no-no in our family. So we really never went in, except for once we did get in because they needed a couple of more people to fill up a square. And we got started. And from then on, it all happened. My mother was influential, and I guess she was trying to keep us off the streets, as you might say, and getting a 4-H club started. And we were kind of fortunate because my uncle was the state 4-H club leader in the state of Connecticut, and headquartered at Storrs College, which is now the University of Connecticut. But we had a hard time getting a 4-H club started because there was no such thing as a music club in 4-H. It had to be dairy or poultry or gardening or something of that nature. And we finally got the club going long after we had learned a few square dance tunes and practiced. My mother was a musician, and as a girl played with her father, going to square dances and horse and buggy up around Waterbury and Wolcott, Connecticut. And she missed it so much, and consequently wanted my brother and myself to get into music. My brother was taking up the drums. I was playing trumpet. She played piano, and we had a little band, and we got neighbor kids in. And about that time, I'll tell you, in those days, people would come through selling things, and just about then somebody came through selling banjos. You could buy a banjo for $10, and you could get 10 free lessons if you bought the banjo now, and he's going through one of those things. And 4 or 5 kids bought banjos, and of course took the banjo lessons. And so we had our first orchestra with about 3 or 4 banjos and a guitar, and my brother on the drums, and I'm playing trumpet, my mother on piano. Beautiful music, beautiful. I'm sorry we don't have a recording of it, because you never did. But I can't imagine now the way we listen to music, what that ever sounded like. But we did form this band, and we decided, my mom decided that if we were so interested in square dancing, to go down and stand outside there and listen, maybe that would be the thing we'd do. So we did get into square dancing. One of the neighbors up the line had an old chicken coop, and he made an offer that if we would clean up the chicken coop, we could use it, donate it as a little dance hall. And we did go up there. We cleaned it all out, and we ran our first dance. And we after the orchestra got in and sat down to play, we didn't only have room for about 2 squares, but we packed the place. We didn't charge any admission, but we put a hat out, and we picked up $2 or $3 that night at the door. And once our club, 4-H club, was formed, we called it the King Street Pioneers, because the section of town we were in was called King Street. It was a big district, a very rural area, covered many miles outside of Danbury, Connecticut. And so we danced once a month there, and the following week we talked it up, and we packed the place again. And we took donations, and finally we had $10 or $12 in our club treasury. And I'm now talking about 1933. And many of you can remember that in 1933, $10 or $12 was something you didn't, you didn't turn away from. Anyway, we went on to, it was a small fortune, you're right. We went on from there. We were successful. At one point, we outgrew the little chicken coop, and my mother had permission that during the summer that we could use our one-room schoolhouse about a mile from our home. We all went to school there. It was 6 grades and 1 teacher, 29 seats, 29 desks, and we would go up as a club, all the boys that had joined the club, and we had others that didn't play music by this time. We went up to the school on Saturday, and we loved this because we didn't have to do chores. We could get away from work on the farm to go up to the school, and we'd remove all the seats and all the desks. We'd pile them up in what they called the girls' entry. We had a girls' side and a boys' side in those days. And we'd pile them all up in the entry, and we'd run our dance. And that hall held about, the school held, well, you could get 4 squares in it, but the problem was there was a big potbelly stove in one corner, and you couldn't really dance too close to the stove because there wasn't any space. And the orchestra formed in and out around the stove because that was the place we were least likely to be in the way. And we held about 3 squares in there, and we packed the place. On a Saturday night during the summer. And on Sunday, we'd go back up after church. We'd all go back up. We'd put the seats in the desk all back again, screw them into the floor. They were screwed in. And this is how we started square dancing in my section of Connecticut. And we came to be very, very well known. And we started to play for the Grange, and we started playing for the firemen. We started playing for other organizations, churches. And we started to put money in the treasury, and we became one of the most successful 4-H clubs in the state of Connecticut because we could send every boy in the club, expenses paid, to our state 4-H club conference in stores once a year, which they had once a year, and no other club could do that. And we sent 3 representatives eventually every year to the National 4-H Club Conference, all expenses paid. I never got to go, my brother, because we had other boys that we felt were more worthy of going, and we let them go. But it was a big thing in our life. From there on, we did many, many things. We just branched out and started festivals and large dances, and I should tell you about some of those with the influence of my uncle. And at Storrs College, they started to conduct a huge festival up there on the athletic field. And he invited square dance orchestras. And by the way, there were no recorded music. We didn't have records. We didn't have record players. We had, in the school where we called, and in the chicken coop, we had no electricity, and we had no microphones or amplifiers. And in 1933, I was not the caller. We had a boy from our neighborhood named Guido Ruggiero, a nice Italian family, who was the caller because he didn't play any instrument. But he wanted to be in the club, so we made him the caller. 2 years later, his family moved away, and he moved, of course, away. And so the big question is, who's going to be the caller? And they decided, well, the trumpet player was the least desirable person in the band, so the trumpet player is going to be the caller. And I'm the caller. Guido just called and from his voice. But I had decided, by this time, we had moved over into the one-room schoolhouse during the summer on not every Saturday, but I think one Saturday a month at first, and then a year later, 2 Saturdays a month. But it was kind of a job to clean this out and put it all back, and it was really a big chore. But I had decided that I would amplify a little bit, and so I rolled up a newspaper into the form of a megaphone, and I called through the newspaper, and people could hear a little better, and I didn't have to yell so loud, because in those days it was just projection. Later, my mother bought me a red megaphone with a gold rim around where the mouthpiece is, and I called for 4 years through a megaphone before we had amplification and electricity in our area up in that section of Connecticut. My voice is husky, and it's been a long while I've been calling, but it still holds up. Once I get calling, it clears up. So those are kind of grassroots and a little bit of history from my personal standpoint. At the festivals, we my uncle started, and my cousins and his family were living on campus up there, you might say, and they couldn't care less about square dancing or music, but they were very athletic. But they did chip in and all, and made a big cooperative effort, family-wise, to promote these things once we got started. And our very first big festival was outside. My uncle had invited square dance orchestras from all over the state of Connecticut to come and participate. And I think we had that first one, 5 square dance orchestras with 5 different callers from around the state of Connecticut, and possibly even one from Massachusetts that had come down there. And we had approximately 1,200 people dancing on the athletic field at that very first festival. And it's the first time that I had really met other callers, because I was just wrapped up in what I was doing, and I was copying what I had heard listening to the caller, whose name was Andy Golder, at that old stagecoach stop. I had heard him do many, many things, and I was just doing what he did. It's the only caller I had ever heard. And the Life on the Ocean from the program, somebody's liable to come up and tell you about it. And hey, later, I'll tell you a story later if we have time on that. But at that festival, I did get to meet other callers, and in our pages here, when you get reading through, I've listed them, and there were some of the callers, and some of these names you will recognize as I just kind of read them off for you now. And these were the strong, very active callers of the day who had a so-called program. We're calling 2-3 nights a week with an orchestra, and having great success running dances and all like that. We had, I'll name one or two, Franny Heinz. How many remember Franny Heinz? Oh, I'm so glad you do. Earl Johnston. He's still around, but he's not calling, as many of you know. Earl Johnston. Corky Calkins. Hey, Sammy Spring. I'm going back. Sammy was a different kind of a caller. Sammy played the fiddle. He called at the Springfield Exposition every year. He was their feature and drew big crowds, and he was there with his orchestra. Sammy would play the fiddle and call at the same time, but he had about a 4-piece band, and he would start in dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, and then he'd stop fiddling. He couldn't really fiddle while he said anything, so he'd stop playing, and he'd be playing dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, Alaman left, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, right and left, right, and then he'd start to play again. And in those days, we weren't callers. We were prompters, or square dance prompter. And I heard Jerry say something about callers, that they were really prompters in those days. And we only prompted command calls, as you might say, until we got to the singing calls. Then we just sang the square dance lyric, if you call it that, the square dance words to the songs. And Sammy was the prompter. And he was big on contras and big on phrasing and timing. And I've written a little bit about Sammy here, which you can read if you're that interested when you get home. We won't take the time for that today. Earl Davis, Duke Miller, Dick Forsher, Rod Linnell, Dick Doyle, Joe Perkins, and many, many others, which I've even written a little paragraph on as I've gone through these big pages, so that you can get some sort of an insight as to what went on in those days. After the war in the 40s, and after going through school, and by the way, both my brother Bob and myself, we went to the University of Maine, and at university I tried to run some dances in order to pay some college expenses. I went to the only hall that we could find up around that way that I could find was in the Methodist church, and they were very much against dancing, but we were able to convince them that I also did marching games, and that if they would like, I could put on a program of marching games. And so with music. And so we did. I was able to run a little square dance then with the Methodist Church, And even in college in those days, if you made $5 or $6 on a Saturday night calling marching games, why, it was a lot of spending money in those days. So all those things were a big help. We in 1948, square dance barns, I had covered all New England and been in many, many square dance halls, and I've listed in these pages the many, many barns that were prominent and where people danced. And what I'm saying is they all had big crowds. I'm listening to Floyd Woodhull in here. He was sort of an influence on my life. I was convinced that I should build a dance hall and run dances because we couldn't really take care of the square dance business, so to speak. And I went up to Floyd's. I heard about this man in Elmira, New York, that he had ran a big, big barn, and he was very successful. So I went up there one night, and I walked into Floyd Woodhull's hall, and I was really amazed. It was full of people. It was noisy and everything else, but the person that impressed me the most was Floyd Woodhull himself. And many of the old-time callers were characters, something like Earl Johnston. Wait till he hears this. But they were really a little cut apart. And Floyd was on stage. He played the accordion, and he called at the same time. And here again, he could call through his accordion playing, but many times he didn't. Floyd chewed tobacco. We're talking about old-timers. Floyd had a spittoon right down here, and when the sets were called up, Floyd would stand up. He'd look out over the floor, and he'd see if all sets were ready. And I'm talking 30 or 40 squares in this hall. This hall was 60 by 100 floor space, wooden floor, and seats out around that. It's a rather large place. And he ran it full 2 nights a week. And it was the biggest crowd I'd seen outside of these festivals in a long, we didn't get those kind of crowds. If we got 15, 20 squares, we were on top of the world. We did get people, but we didn't get 50, 60 squares like Floyd did. So Floyd would look out over the crowd. He'd see everybody ready and sit down, and he'd adjust his accordion. He'd strap it on, and then he'd get all ready, and the band's all ready behind him, and he'd look down, and he'd say, da-da, with his accordion, and he'd spin in the spittoon, and he'd say, hell, a man left, and roo-diddle-doo, and the orchestra would start to play, and everybody would start to dance, and every tip, this is what Floyd did. And you had to remember Floyd Woodhull after seeing him and watching him work. And he was quite a showman. He dressed in bib overalls, and he had just plaid shirts and funny hats. And in intermission, sometimes he'd come back out with very loud checkered pants, red socks, different color shoes, one on each foot, and a straw hat on his head. And but he'd always do the same thing. He'd look out over the crowd, and he'd tilt his hat a little bit, and the sets are all ready. And he'd sit down, and he'd adjust his accordion, and he'd put up the mic, and he'd spit in the spittoon, and hell, a man left. But he catered to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people for years and years and years. And they were doing Life on the Ocean Wave, Duck for the Oyster and the Clam, and the Hunt, Chase the Rabbit, Chase the Squirrel, and Bird in the Cage, and all those sort of things. I was so impressed that I went back and I said, I've just got to build a hall. So I did. And I borrowed my father's truck. I went up to Massachusetts with my brother and my father, and we bought lumber. We brought it to the mill up there and had it sawed. Brought the lumber back rough, piled it on a lot, which I had been able to buy from saving square dance money and all these years. And I stacked it and dried it over the winter, and the next day I went down, or the next year I went down and with a carpenter who had been building chicken coops for my father, and had a couple of helpers, and we had 2 helpers and the master carpenter and me down there. We built the hall. We had a hall called the Al Brundage's Country Barn, and it's been a lot of people come through that barn. A lot of things have happened there that did influence the square dancing in New England. There was a 40 by 80 floor space in that hall, and it was a very popular place. Some of the callers and some of the people that you know in our activity today came to the barn. I was influenced in the early 50s, late 40s by Dr. Lloyd Shaw, Pappy Shaw, and I went out to Colorado. I can't remember the real year. It might have been 49 or 50, but anyway, I was so impressed that I came back and decided that I just can't run these square dances like we've been running. We've got to get into this new stuff because it was beautiful. The square dancing that I grew up with was rough and tumble, more or less. Catch as catch can sort of thing. 16 count swings, and what I mean is really swing. Jim Mayo is one of the people that used to come to my barn. He's going to school at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, only 40 miles or so from my barn. He would drive down there with a sweet little girl who had a ponytail about this long, and the game was to swing her so fast that the ponytail stayed right out straight all the time. 16 beats. And if you remember the old Eastern style calling, you'll remember that there were a lot of those 16-beat swings in every figure, just filled with them. So it was not genteel, and as Jerry has pointed out, that many of the traditional dances are and were in those days, but it was down-home type square dancing. But I was so impressed with what Pappy Shaw had shown and what I had learned out there, and I really had never seen anything like it before, and came back and started. I'm going to teach some of these people how to really square dance and going into this. And I think the first things that I had seen, I'd never seen before, were the Alamandar, which had come in about that time, and I had never seen a figure like that where people backed up. Everybody was moving forward in the stuff that we were doing. So that I decided I'll get a class and I'll teach some people. And I had a terrible time. If you think you have a time now getting classes or getting people to join square dancing into your class, you really should have been back there in 1948, 49, and 50, 51. And it was tough then, too, because people thought they could square dance. Thousands of people square danced. And they just walked in and they get over in a couple four position, and by the time the dancing got around to them, they knew what to do. Because it was visual, you could see. There was no big problem. We were not very complicated. And consequently, they thought they could dance because that's what they'd been doing for many, many years. When I told people I was going to form a class, they said, well, who's going to go to this class? Because I've been dancing 20 years, Sonny, and what are you going to teach me? And the thing was, I got something to teach, but they wouldn't believe it. So classes were hard to come by, but it finally did get it going, and this is one of the ways that we kind of made the transition into what we now know as square dancing, and with the styling points and the figures and everything. I have so much to say that I could be here 3 or 4 hours, but I've just glanced down and I'm seeing that our time is getting very close, and I'd like to do a couple of things before I do close. One is I do have some tapes here which are not good, and I must apologize for their quality, but I wasn't able to bring my records of these. We talking about the transition of Eastern style or traditional dancing into our more what we called Western style. One of the ways I was able to get this kind of square dancing going there was to name it different. I named it Western style. And people, well, what's Western style? And I had the Alamandar and the Do Paso to teach them, which was different than they'd ever seen. And I had a few more other figures, but that was about Alamo style, and that's about all that I had was any different in those days. But as the activity grew, and as more movements came into it, as you know, they came on pretty fast after a while, and you had more than you could handle. And if you want to look in Burleson's book, there's a lot of them in there, and you just can't handle that many. But we did develop, and some of the figures people more or less knew by different names. I'm going to play you a tape now, and the calling was different. You have to, don't apologize, but this is a recording of Larry Loy, who my brother Bob worked with at the University of Massachusetts for many years. And in here, you will hear, and I hope you can hear it well, the figure. He has two figures in here. He says, head two couples lead to the right, and right and left 8. Okay? Right and left 8. We know it now as 8 chain through. Okay? Because they did a right and left through all the way up and down the line. Later he says dive to the center or something like that and circle up 4 and do a cowboy style do-si-do. And the cowboy style do-si-do was what Pappy Shaw was doing out in Colorado. And here's Larry Loy in Massachusetts doing this with a band of the time. But it was a different, and he had picked it up somewhere and had recorded it. And it was the same as Pappy Shaw, and which eventually developed into Do Paso through some historical things that many of you can remember with Herb Gregerson and many arguments when we first tried to standardize, through Pappy Shaw's influence, tried to standardize many of the terms that we were using so that people could, callers could travel around the country and be able to call a dance. Because in those days, Herb Gregerson, for instance, was a Western caller from Texas, and if he came to New England and called do-si-do, he did not get what he thought he was going to get. He got people going around each other back to back, and he was floored. He'd never seen that. That's not the way we do it in Texas. And so there were many kinds, 6 or 7 different kinds of do-si-dos done around the United States in those days, and it had to be standardized, which is another part of history. Let me play Larry Loy here for you just a moment and see if we can pick that up and see if we can pick this up. Here we go. Now we're on tape and the quality's not that good. Let's see what we get. It'll stop. Bear with it. Somewhere along in the early 50s, we were dancing the same, some of the same material we were doing now, but the names were a little different. This record gives you an idea. This is strictly Eastern style. They've been dancing this figure for many, many, many years in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and you'll notice there's a right and left 8. Today we call that 8 chain through. Then later there's a Western style or cowboy style do-si-do. Now we call that do paso. There's a lot of history and stories behind that. But let's listen as Lawrence Loy calls it on the MGM label.
Now, honor your partners, corner salute. All join hands, go lickety-skoo. The other way home in the little red wagon. Hurry up, boys, and don't be lagging. When you get home, swing high and low. Swinger till she hollers whoa. Then promenade, and around you go. Now promenade 8 till you come straight. Promenade, around you go. The 2-head couples to the right. Balance there, but not all night. Then right, left, 8, across you go. Right, left, 8, and don't be slow. Head couples to center. Circle 4. 4 hands up and around you go. Cowboy style with a do-si-do. Hurry up, boys, and don't be slow. Lady go see, the chest go do. Chicken in a bread pan, picking up dough. One more dough, and home you go, and everybody swing.
There. It's a little different, isn't it? But that's what it was. And, oops, got a problem here. And I do want to play 1 or 2 more before we close, just to show you what has gone on. And I'd like to play one of myself. I embarrass myself every time I play this. And this is an old Diamond label. You've never heard of it. And the music behind here is not my band, but my band was pretty much the same as this. This is Craven Edwards and his Lazy K Ranch Boys. Ed Durlacher, who was a big influence in square dancing and all over the country, really, through his albums and folios, but in the East particularly, used to come up to our farm and stay overnight and go to our square dances to pick up material. And he'd write it all down and everything. He's writing a book. And we didn't think much about it in those days, and and all that. Finally, he did write his book. He put some of the calls on records. I'll try to play one if I have time. And he sold these records to just about every library and school system in the East, if not in the country. And he made his living. And his son, Don Durlacher, who came after him actually made their living through the records and the albums and the sale of these books and records. And it amazed me as a young man, because I didn't think he was a great caller. But anyway, after this, I didn't think I was a very good caller either. Through Ed said came out one weekend, and he said, Al, he said, how'd you like to do a recording? And I said, well, I don't know. I was a little bit afraid of that, because I had only been using a microphone not too long. And he said, well, I've got a spot for you. He said, if you can get to New York, there's $25 in it. I said, I'll do it. And he said, I can't do it. I do it myself, but I'm in contract to Sonora Records, and it'd be against my contract. And you've done us, or your family's done me a lot of favors, so I'd like for you to do it. And here's what I called. This is Al Brundage, his first record he ever made, and there's only a few left, thank God.
This is a recording by Al Brundage, first one he ever made in New York City, 1948. Craven Edwards and the Lazy K Ranch Boys. And listen to the style in those days.
Well, you can get the gist of it. It shows you how you can improve over the years. So if there's any young callers and just starting in, and if you feel like you've got a few problems, you will overcome them. Because when I listen to this, I can't really believe I was doing that. But I'll tell you, one of the things, I actually was a little bit smoother than that, but I was influenced very strongly because Ed Durlecker was in the studio that day, and he gave me a big pep talk before we started. He said, now, Al, he said, you got to have a lot of enthusiasm. You got to really get out there and got to really do it. So, and he was out, come on, and behind the, we didn't have studios in those days like they do now. He said, more enthusiasm. I was yelling, hey, hey. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. But that's what it sounded like. Now, there's so much more to history, and there's so much more to all this, and I've given you a kind of a personal type history, and the history of New England developed from some of our efforts and the efforts of my family. A lot of people, one more thing, thought, we all learned from Dad Brundage. Well, that's not really true. Dad Brundage really wasn't too much in favor of all this music business at first. And then I went away to school, and my brother Bob took over, and for 2 years. And then when Bob went away to school, we both went to the University of Maine, and Dad decided that, we'd have so many, we called them dance jobs in those days. We had so many dance jobs, and money was coming. It was like a cash crop. Times were a little tough, and on the farm and things, and then, maybe he better keep this thing going so the boys would have something to come back to when they get back out of school. So he started to call, and it wasn't a big job in those days because Dad had been listening to us for a long while, and he had a pretty good mind. He just memorized all these singing calls, and he stepped up on the mic and he started to call. And so it's kind of evolved backwards. We didn't learn from our father. Our father learned from us. And he carried forth. It was very, very popular. And just as a word, perhaps, of encouragement to some of you older guys out there, my dad kept calling until he was 80 years old, 81, I believe. And that point he had a hip operation. He stopped for a year, and he went back and called 2 or 3 more years after that. My mother played piano until her fingers got so bad with arthritis she couldn't play, until she was in her 80s in a little community down near where Don Armstrong had his hall in Florida, the other side of the state from where I am now, and in a little community hall, and they gave a lot of pleasure to a lot of people until well into their 80s. And I think that's a wonderful thing, and the people there in that retired community enjoyed them so much. And I think we can all do that. It's something we should keep in. And as you retire from where you are now and go to these places, keep at it, because you do a wonderful thing for a lot of people. It's a great business, and I'm glad to be a part of it. We're going to have some question and answers, I'm sure, Jerry.
A nice hand for Al Brundage. Thank you, Al. Always a good job. This whole thing is on paper. It's all documented, but we're running short of copies, and there's some on the table back there. If you don't get a copy and you would like a copy, write the office, right? CALLERLAB office, and they'll see that you get one. Okay, we have just a short time here. We're running really close. Do we have any questions? If you have a question, come forward. Put it on the mic because we need it on the tape. No questions? We'll... Yes, Robert Osgood, please come forward.
I just wanted to add to Al's, many of us grew up with Soldier Joy. Many of us grew up with Soldier's Joy, and that was Woodhull, wasn't it? The big 12-inch. And what was on the other side of that? Blackberry Quadrille. How many of you own those records? I think those were the only things we had there for a while. It was great.
Thank you. Yes. I would like to thank you for being here. I'd like to thank the Chevaliers, John and Gay, for helping out, Lanny and Ted McQuaid for dancing with us in the first part of it. We appreciate that. And we'll hope to do this. I hope that somewhere down the line somebody will pick up on the history and background of American square dancing, because some of this is being lost. People are passing away. The information is lost. We really need this. CALLERLAB needs a good source, a good book on the history of square dancing. And I hope that somehow that will be picked up. So if you have any information or you have any suggestions, please give it to CALLERLAB, and let's see what we can do about it. And if anybody has any Ford records, I collect them. If you have them, I'll pay you a premium. I'll probably pay $1 a piece for them. Okay, we got a little bit of Ed Durlacher here.
Living on square dancing, and his son inherited and was not a caller, but did the same thing for 2 generations, square dancing support.
This is Ed Durlacher in 1941 or 42, recording on a Decca label with his ranch hands in New York City. Ed sold thousands and thousands of these records and these albums to libraries and schools all over the country. And he got much of his material from the Brundage family. He used to come out and visit us, stay overnight, and go to one of our dances, and he picked up all the stuff and made booklets and teaching programs and did a great job. Here's old Ed Durlacher.
Honor your partners. Honor your corners. Take a lead. My pretty lady. The other way back, you're on the wrong track. Make your feet go wiggity wag. Get ready. Page couple ready. Page couple right. You signal half. The inside couple on. Dip and dive and away you go. The inside high and the outside low. Hurry, 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 let's go. Over and then below. I need a price through to the other 2. And he signal halfway around. Just for the last piece.
Thank you, Al. That's very, very nice. Very good. Thank you. There's some prints hanging around the wall, and we had really planned to have those on sale, but we have someone who bought them, and the funds will go to CALLERLAB. And I have 3 up here. If anybody's interested in these 3 prints, they're copies of some of the stuff that's hanging up. This one and this one outside the door, and here's one with the Money Musk. If anybody's interested in these, could I hear a bid? Somebody give me a bid down here. Can I get a $5 bill? $5 bill down. Thank you. 6. 5 back here. 6. Somebody give me 6 for it. $6. I got a $5 bid. $5 bid. Sold to the man back there. $5. We've got another one, a better one right here. How much am I bid on this one? We got a $5 bid back here. $5 bid. Somebody give me 6. 5.5. 6. 6 over here. We got a 6. Do I hear a 7 down here? Thank you. 7. We got a $7 bid. $7 bid. 8. Give me an 8. 8. $7 bid. $7 bid. 8. 8. 8. 7. Sold. Now we have a real choice. I'm sorry, Al. Money Musk. Now that should bring a price. Priceless painting. Original. Why does it say Xerox on the back? Okay, folks, change your ways. A $10 bid. Would somebody give me $10 for this? $10? Would somebody give me $8? Thank you. I got an $8 bid. $8 bid. Somebody make it 9. Juice 9 back here. Are you scratching your face, or what are you doing? Are you bidding, folks? $9 bid. $9? $9 bid. Do I hear a $9 bid? $9 bid. We got a $9. You're bidding against yourself. We're bidding. Are you going to bid? Okay, got a $9 bid. $9 bid. Somebody make it 10. How about 10? Let's sell it. $10. You got a $10 bid. Thank you. 11, 10, 11, 11, 10, 11. How about 10.5? Thank you. 10.5. How about 11? Come on, scare them off. $11.